Hey guys, so I think one of the big problems when we're doing Math Excel is people just aren't inputting their answers correctly. And a lot of that has to do with the radicals, so those square roots and how you're simplifying them. So I'm just going to give you a quick lesson today on how to simplify it. It should look semi-familiar. I might do it in a different way. So if you have a different um, process to get the same answer, you're fine. But this is the way that I do it and it's worked for me. So I'm going to go with that. And if you can't remember it, this is a good way to follow. So when I say simplifying radicals, sorry, I'm going to see my hands here. That means like if I had the square root of 12 in my answer, Math Excel is not going to accept the square root of 12 as your answer. It wants it simplified. And when we say simplify, we want to break it down. So we're going to make a factor tree. So my factor tree, I'm going to find two factors that multiply to 12. I'm going to pick 4 and 3. What I always want is the way I do it. Some people like to go a little further and do doubles. I like to find one of the factors that's a perfect square. So with that being a perfect square, here's how I would simplify it. I would say, oh, I know the square root of 4. The square root of 4 is 2. And then the square root of 3 we say is irrational, so it stays as the square root of 3. So instead of writing your answer as the square root of 12, you would write it as 2 square root of 3. So I'm just at the top going to make a little list for myself to remind myself of the perfect squares. So they're 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, 64, 81, 100, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so just to have a little list. So let's look at a few other examples just so you're getting used to that process again. It is something you've probably done in your past life in your algebra class, but once again, let's be honest, you might not remember that much stuff. So let's say I said, hey, can you simplify the square root of 50? And you would say, all right, I'm going to make a factor tree. So what I usually do is I try to find a factor from up here. So I would say, no, it's not divisible. Is 50 divisible by 4? No, not divisible by 9 or 16, but it is divisible by 25. 25 times 2 gives me 50. So what I'm going to do is take the square root of 25, which is 5, take the square root of 2, which is just the square root of 2, and that would be my simplified version. So let's try a few more just to make sure we're getting used to the process. So let's say I said the square root of 27. Okay, so I'm going to break it down. I just kind of go through this list. Okay, it's not divisible by 4. Oh, 27 is divisible by 9. 9 times 3. So what's the square root of 9? It's 3. And the square root of 3 we say is irrational, so it stays underneath. So I think that's been one of the bigger problems when we're trying. I know a lot of you say you hate Math Excel, but I think a lot of the problem is we're just putting the answer and not in the correct simplified version. So it's telling you it's wrong. For now, just keep trying. That's all that matters. But we want to make sure we're getting used to simplifying some radicals. So let's look at a few more. The more examples we do, hopefully the more of this makes sense. I'm just going to move this down so you can see a little bit better. So let's say I said something like the square root of 32. And you would say, okay, so kind of go through your list. Oh, 32 is divisible by 4. And 32 divided by 4 gives you 8. What you do have to do is kind of always just make sure you can't do any more, what are those called? Leaves. I don't know. I can't think right now. But we know the square root of 4. 8, we're saying, okay, I don't know the square root of 8, but that's also divisible by 4. If you had noticed, actually, the square root of 32 is divisible by 16, so you want to try to choose the highest perfect square. So if I were to simplify this, I say, okay, the square root of 4 is 2. The square root of 4 is also 2. And then we have the square root of 2. What you would do is multiply those two numbers on the outside to get your final of 4 square root of 2. If you had noticed from the beginning, I'll just do a quick, the square root of 32, if you had noticed it was divisible by 16, that would have just saved you a step. So you just want to make sure you're breaking things down all the way. So those are the same thing, because we want to make sure everything is as simplified as possible. So let's try another one. I don't know. Let's do the square root of 147. So you're probably like 147, that doesn't have any factors. It does, and you have to check. So if you don't know, you have to check. You can't just magically assume. So 147, as I kind of go through my list, is not divisible by 4, 9, 16, 25, 36. But if I do 147 divided by 49, it's actually 49 times 3. Okay. So once I do that, I would say, oh, I know the square root of 49. It's 7. And the square root of 3 just ends up being the square root of 3 because you can't simplify it, and that's your simplified version. So what I want you to do right now, I'm going to give you maybe just 2 to practice. I'll give you a minute. If you need to pause, feel free if I kind of rush you there, and see if you can try these 2. So if I said, hey, can you simplify number 1, let's do the square root of 24. And for number 2, can you do the square root of, 162? So I'm just going to like be quiet for about 15 seconds, and I'm going to come back on. Feel free to pause if you need extra time. All right, so I'm going to go through the steps once again. Pause if you need some more time. So 24, I say to myself, okay, well, what's 24 divisible by? Don't just pick 2 random numbers. Try to pick one that's a perfect square. And 24 is divisible by 4. And you might say, well, 6 is 2 times 3. I don't care if it's 2 times 3. If it's not a perfect square, I don't care about it. So my final answer would be the square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of 6 just comes out to the square root of 6. So that would be your simplified version. And then the square root of 162, as I'm going through my things, I'm not really finding anything. Let me check. I have my calculator because I don't know what they are. Oh, it's divisible by 9. Oh, 9 times 18. Good to know. So I'm saying, okay, 9's a perfect square. That's all set. But 18, is that divisible by any perfect squares? Heck, yes, it is. It's divisible by 9. Actually, that's divisible by 81, if you realize. It's kind of just splitting it into 2. You pick the higher one. But if I take the square root of 9, it comes out to 3. The square root of 9 comes out to 3. The square root of 2 you just leave. And then since there are 2 numbers out there, you multiply them to 9 square root of 2. So you are going to have an assignment with some practice for these. I'm going to come back on and do another video about how to rationalize denominators. That's kind of a separate step. But everything's kind of based off of this simplifying radicals. And we hadn't really gotten over it in detail, so I think hopefully this will maybe jog your memory. If you're doing it a different method, but we're getting the same answers, that's perfectly fine. There's a lot of different ways to do these. So whatever works for you works for me. So you are going to try the practice assignment on your Google Classroom that goes with this.